Hello everyone and welcome to Bash Course Quarantine US Government and Politics. My name is April and today we're going to talk about the Electoral College. It's election season. I am literally filming this video while people across the country are casting their ballot for president. A recent campaign news highlight was that Biden has been campaigning in Georgia. This is news because presidential candidates tend to focus on swing states, where it's unclear which party will get a majority of voters. You'll constantly hear pundits saying that presidential elections will be decided by Florida, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. How can it be that 3 out of 51 states decide the whole election? The answer is the Electoral College. You'll often hear it opposed to the popular vote. The popular vote is the more intuitive one, simply the total number of votes for each candidate across the whole country. The winner of the popular vote usually wins the Electoral College, except for 5 times, including 2016 and 2000. However, the popular vote isn't in the Constitution. The Constitution lays out the Electoral College as the way to elect presidents. The Electoral College is a system where delegates from each state, called electors, vote for president rather than the president being directly voted for by the people. The electors are usually assigned to a political party, so then voters, by voting for a Democrat or Republican, are voting for the set of Democrat or Republican electors. In most states, all the electors must vote for whoever won the plurality, most votes in that state. It's known as the winner-take-all system. This is key because it means that a candidate who won just 51%, for example, of the state's votes can then get all their electors. It is each state's choice how they decide to select and assign electors. They also each carry out their own popular vote, which began in the 19th century. Maine and Nebraska, the outliers, decided to assign electors according to congressional districts and have the electors vote for the candidate who won in the individual congressional districts, as well as having 2 electors who vote according to the whole state's plurality. The number of electors each state has is the number of representatives they have in Congress, and D.C. get 3, so the Electoral College has 538 members, with the majority being 270. The winner must have received a majority of electoral votes. If there is no majority in the college, the House of Representatives votes to decide the president. Another smaller news item is that Hillary Clinton will be an elector for New York this year. Electors can be anyone who isn't currently holding federal office, but they're often people of some political status because they're usually chosen by the political party, and so they're expected to vote accordingly. Thus, when citizens vote for president, they're voting for the slate of electors. The presence of such high-status individuals in the Electoral College also reminds us that it was created to avoid the tyranny of the majority, where a popularly elected president would have too populist a mandate. Additionally, some framers wanted to ensure voters were adequately educated, rather than just any common person. These days, electors widely vote according to their pledge, but in the 19th century, so-called faithless electors were more common. However, only 26 states and D.C. actually officially bind their electors to a specific vote through oaths and fines. The Electoral College was designed during the Constitutional Convention, all the way back in 1787. The system has stayed pretty similar since then, except for a constitutional amendment in 1804 that essentially combined the vice president with the presidential ticket, rather than just assigning the vice presidency to the presidential runner-up. States and parties have also refined their rules since then. You may recall, for example, from the compromise that resulted in a bicameral legislature, that there was a lot of discussion in the Constitutional Convention over how democratic they wanted this pioneering democracy to be. The idea that the leader of a nation could be chosen by a simple vote of all eligible voters, as one group of framers suggested, felt too radical and populist for the other delegates who preferred Congress to elect the president. The resulting compromise stopped short of letting Congress, state governors, or state legislatures do the electing, but didn't have the people do it either. It's really been the state's rules, through the institution of popular votes to assign electors, that have made it a bit more representative. However, many people today argue that the Electoral College is an undemocratic method of choosing the president. The main problem is that the winner of the Electoral College doesn't necessarily have to win the popular vote. This happens primarily because of the winner-take-all system, where most states have electors who all vote for whichever candidate got plurality. The second problem is that the Constitution doesn't require electors to vote as they have pledged, although electors have done so 99% of the time. In theory, a significant number of electors could disregard the votes of the millions of Americans they represent. Additionally, the way electoral votes are assigned for each state makes the votes of individuals have different weights depending on what state they're in. DC has a very small population, but we're still entitled to 3 electors. Then each Texas elector ends up representing a lot more people than each DC elector, which many say is unfair. Basing electoral votes on congressional representation also used to benefit states with large populations of enslaved people, who couldn't vote but still were counted for representation due to the 3/5 compromise. Changing the Electoral College would require an extensive constitutional amendment, which is extremely difficult and currently relatively low priority. An intermediate step could be for states to replace the winner-take-all system and require electors to vote as they pledged. But the status quo won't remain for a while just because it's hard to change, but because some people are actively in favor of the current Electoral College system. Proponents would remind you that small, doubtful margins of victory are still possible with direct election, and that a popular vote isn't even mentioned by the Constitution for selecting a president. They'd also point to the fact that only 5 out of 57 presidential elections have resulted in a discrepancy between electoral and popular vote, and only a few of them had a big discrepancy, such as 2016. It also maintains one aspect of states' independence from each other that's a hallmark of our federal system. And we aren't necessarily a backwards outlier from other democracies. Many of them use the even more indirect parliamentary system to elect a prime minister. And some proponents are also assured that this group of electors will have more moderation than a potentially spontaneous surge in a popular vote. Let's recap with an example. It's 2000, and I'm a voter in Portland, Oregon, which was actually a swing state along with Washington. I cast my vote for Al Gore. By doing that, I'm saying that I want 7 democratically chosen electors to vote in the Electoral College. Gore does end up winning Oregon, but with only 51% of the vote. All of our electoral votes do go to him, though. In Florida, there was a similarly razor-thin margin, causing legal battles all the way up to the Supreme Court. But there, Bush won, which was key to his electoral victory, despite Gore's lead in the nationwide popular vote.
Whatever you think, make sure you vote. It's really important.